give food for thought. We have with us today Judge Jenkins, and he is a justice on the Tennessee Court of Appeals, and was a former cooperating attorney with the NAACP's Legal Defense and Education Fund. His legal rulings have addressed the importance of policy teaching on equality and education, and he represented the plaintiffs in Nashville's long-running desegregation case. So please join me in welcoming Judge.
Hello, hello. I'm not used to being amplified, so take me a minute or two to get used to that. So, how is everybody today? The day after Valentine's Day. Kind of was trying to figure out what to say or how to go about talking about Black History Month and what have you. And I think what I want to do is kind of start with history and the importance of history to what we are. I teach a course out of middle school in the history of the way that America has treated race, or how race has been treated in America since the first slaves arrived here in 1619. And one thing that comes clear is that history is recorded in books, but it lives. You know, we are the products of things that happened last week, last year, 20 years ago, before you were born, before I was born. And so I talk in my class a lot about how we have evolved as a nation and how we continue to evolve as a nation. And one of the things that, as we look at contemporary society, we look at the way things are now, we look at the craziness that's going on up in Washington and around the world, we have to look at that in context of our evolution as a nation and our evolution as a world. Okay. For as much as American history is, it's only, what, 300 years. Okay. And there are nations of the world that, you know, you can date in the thousands of years. I don't know how many you all may have been over to Israel or Africa or some places in the Middle East where you really see 1,000 years ago. And we look at American history and the craziness and confusion that we've had over the years of our existence. So, and we're basically coming up on about 400 years. So, when I talk about history and when I talk to groups like this, I want you all to keep in mind that this is not a lecture on what happened 200 years ago. This is an exposition of what happened 200 years ago, and how that has meaning and effect for us now. And looked in that context, Black history is, or the history of Black people in America is I think, a better name for it, is uniquely American. It is unique and it is American. It is as American as the history of white people in America. It is as American as apple pie. It is the history of people in America and the challenges that those people faced, the challenges that were imposed upon them, and how they survived, how they won, how they lost, what they won, what they lost. And sooner or later, at some point in time, there may be a great judgment about history, but we are still living history now. And believe it or not, in 20 years or 30 years, there will be people sitting in those seats that are your children who are going to be talking about this day, February the 15th, 2017, as a day in history. I know you hate it. I know I hate to hear that. But it's coming, so get ready for it. Now, one of the things that really excites me when I talk about Black history and I kind of think that a lot of people tend to think only of the bad stuff, of segregation and slavery and all that. And I'm not minimizing that at all. It is bad, and it's something that we're still trying to work our way through and still paying the price for. But one of the things about Black History Month is it celebrates and it highlights people who came through that, who survived it, how they lived in it. And that's very important. I am personally, I am extremely fortunate to be from a family that was they had it going on. They had it going on. Seriously. My first thing is I can record back to slavery days my family. Okay? And that's unique. Okay? And what that tells me that my family, or my father's side of the family, both his mother and his father, both came out of Mississippi and Alabama, out of slavery. And my grandmother's side of the family was Richardson family. And Richardson had a trade. He was not a veterinarian, but someone that trained horses and animals and what have you, that put shoes on horses and all that. And came out of slavery. And we have a Bible where he was allowed to marry Ellen Richardson, who became Mary Helen Richardson, and their children. Okay, my great grandfather on the male side was an educated man. There used to be a school here in Nashville. It was called Roger Williams University. All right. After the Civil War, there were a number of schools that were set up to educate the former slaves, right? Because there was no system of education for the former slaves, right? And there was very little education for the whites who in that era. But some of the religious societies in New York, in the North and elsewhere, Northeast, came in and established schools. And largely what the schools taught at first was they taught people to be teachers, okay? And so how they did it, I don't know. But a lot of the education of blacks in the South came about, evolved through the efforts of religious societies in the North and Northeast, okay? And of course, the Northeast was the landing point for the people who came here from Europe with a culture already there, and they brought their culture with them. Okay, so and in England there was a culture of learning, culture of economics, and so on and so forth. And so that's how America began, how it began its evolution. And you will learn throughout history, throughout American history, that there has always been a tension between the North and the South, between the culture of the North and the culture of the South, right? Agriculture in the South, industry and learning and education in the North, banking in the North. That's where the financial stuff began. And then as America expanded west, one of the great controversies was, would the states west be slave states or free states? That's one of the things that led to the Civil War. And a lot of people say the Civil War was fought to free the slaves. Not quite. That was a consequence of the Civil War. But let there be no doubt about the expansion of the West into the West and who would populate it. That was a matter of power, right? Who would have the representatives in Congress? Would they be the representatives, from the Missouri and Kansas and Oklahoma? Would they be representing slave states or free states? Because there was a tremendous battle between the abolitionists in the North and the slaveholders, the slave states in the South, because the economy in the South was agriculture. That's labor intensive, which means you had to have a lot of labor. and slavery was a system of free labor. It just happened that black
Katie Breckner and Darian Miller Kennedy, please return to the main office.
were also denied political rights and citizenship rights. But there were poor whites in the South who were just as indentured as slaves were. They worked for no money. A lot of them had come over from England and Europe, and as the cost of their passage over, they agreed to commit to a work without pay. And therefore, and that is how I have learned that my family acquired the name Dinkins. There were some people in Scotland, I believe, who we met. I mean, you know, we're, one of my nephews is Facebook friends with some, you know, some of the white people who came here and over the generations. Okay. So in any event, my great grandfather was an educated man, and he ended up being president of a college known as Selma University. How many people have heard of Selma, Alabama? That's where my family's from. That's where I spent a year of my life when I was growing up. That's where I spent all my summers. And my great-grandfather was the president of Selma University. His son, my grandfather, was also the president of Selma University. Okay, they had it going on. These were, you know, I mean seriously. Okay, and my great grandfather had another son who died in 1895 when he was 12 years old. And I was looking through the family house one day, right? We have a 100-year-old house down in Selma that has a leaky roof in it that we just had to have fixed a couple of weeks ago. But I was looking in the family library one day, and I found a book, okay, that was, you know, when we talk about Black History Month, as if that is a new thing. The title of this book, which was copyrighted in 1891, is a school history of the Negro race in America, right? From 1619 to 1890, all right? Okay. Now, when I said they had it going on, they had it going on. My great-grandfather bought this book and he dedicated it to his son. And on May the 10th of 1893, he wrote, presented to Charles Spencer Dinkins Jr. by his father, Charles Spencer Dinkins Sr. Read this book, my boy, and learn what our people have suffered, have done, are suffering, and are doing, and resolve by the grace of God to make your mark in the world by helping to free them from civil and political oppression. May 10, 1893. All right? Now that blows me away. That blows me away. All right? And because I'm kind of that way, when I saw this book, I think I was in law school at the time. And I decided to keep it because my great-grandfather's son was never able to fulfill this legacy because he died. And so I keep this as my guiding light for what I've done through my career, right? And I don't say that to brag on myself or anything, okay? Why I say that is each of us has a history. Each of you have a history. You should know your history. Okay? White people do not have black history. Black people do not have white history. But we all have our histories. And what America does is blend all of that stuff together. And there is good in some, there is bad in some, right? And the history is different. Black history in America is a history of overcoming, of achieving against odds. White history is a little bit different than that, okay? And when we start and try and address those issues, you know, the present issues that race creates in this country, we tend to get so caught up in negativity and argument and rhetoric that we don't appreciate the fact that we all have history and where it all came from and how it all blends in. And to me, you hear a lot of people say, why do we need Black History Month? Well, we need it, right? Why not? It is a unique part of American history. And try as you may, we will never be able to erase the history of this country. We will never be able to erase it. We don't have to wallow in it. We find what is good in it and we celebrate that. And we find what is bad and say we will not go back there. Okay? And that is the challenge that I give to this generation. Don't go back. Don't go back. Do not go back. Resist going back. Continue on the evolution of the greatness that America was created and ordained to instill in its people. Now, having said all that, I know it's more than a mouthful. Let me rest and hear some of your thoughts or questions or what have you. Okay? Oh, wow, okay. I was involved in a lot of civil rights laws. I think the one that was mentioned was the Nashville school desegregation case. And begin. Back in the mid-1950s, the U.S. Supreme Court held that segregated schools that were segregated by law were unconstitutional. And a lot of the public education system, particularly in the South, was segregated by law. There was a law here that said blacks and whites cannot be educated in the same space, right? And the Supreme Court held that that was unconstitutional. People didn't, boards of education didn't say, okay, well, we'll do things the right way. It took lawsuits to be filed, for many, many, many years. And there was a gentleman over in East Nashville. His name was A.Z. Kelly. He was a barber. He was a member of my father's church. There's a church in East Nashville that was resisting the gentrification of East Nashville, called First Baptist East Nashville. And my father was pastor there. That's the first church I used to run in the aisles in. And Mr. Kelly was a member of his congregation. He was truly one of the finest men you will ever meet. I choke up just thinking about it. He was a prince of a man. And he had a son named Robert. They lived over near East High School, right? But because of the segregation, Robert had to go over to Pearl High School, which is now MLK. He had to go past East High School to go over to MLK, all right? And so Mr. Kelly became the plaintiff in that lawsuit. There was a similar man in the county. His name is Maxwell, Reverend Henry Maxwell. And that's where Maxwell Middle School came from. Mr. Maxwell, or the Reverend Maxwell, and they tell me he was a fire, brimstone, Old Testament Baptist preacher, right? Had son. And his children at that time where they lived was out in the county. And there was one black high school in the county, which is now Haynes Middle School. And so they had to go all the way from Nolensville to Haynes Middle School every day. And so they became the plaintiffs in the county case because each in their own way had the longest distance to go to receive an education. And so that case was filed in, I think, about 1956. And I got involved in 1976, and we settled the case in about 1998 when the system was declared unitary. So, and there's a book by a woman named Ansley Erickson. She's a professor at Columbia in New York, book of the history of the Nashville case, and in your leisure time, you might want to read that book. But it is not a short story. It is a unique story of Nashville and desegregation in Nashville, good, the bad, the ugly. You know, and this is one of the things when I was saying don't go backwards. One of the bad things that has been happening in its city is that the public schools are resegregated, and that's going to create more problems than the expediency of it.
So we should be kind of wrapping things up.
Yeah.
So Judge Deacon showed me a lovely picture of himself, Martin Luther King Jr. So that's
I told you my dad was a minister. Well, every summer he used to drag us around to these conventions, and that was our summer vacation. Well, when I was 10 years old, the summer vacation was, the convention was held in Denver, and my dad and Martin Luther King were friends, and so he was out there, and lo and behold, popped up, and I got a picture with him. When I was 10 years old. So believe it, old people at some point in time were young. Believe it or not. Believe it or not. Okay. So that's my family with Martin Luther King.
Just make a comment if you saw that other schools kind of resegregated in Nashville. What legal recourse could you suggest to try to address that issue?
That would be another book. The table is a little bit different now because to some extent they're not segregated by law. And I think, you could still, if people wanted to, they could still challenge that as a violation of equal protection of laws. But it might be a different sort of burden. A lot of the desegregation cases, it was clear that initially they were violating the law. And so a lot of the lawsuits were over what is the effective way to desegregate. Okay. Once systems were declared unitary, that sort of wipes the slate clean. Okay. And so now people would have to say that the desegregation was created by the Board of Education for the purpose of resegregating, which is a little bit higher mountain to climb. I do think that as a community issue, that it can be addressed without having to file a lawsuit, and all that. It can be addressed, and it's a trite phrase, but it can be addressed by doing the right thing. Okay. But another thing that you will find out as you grow older and grow through life and everything is adults do get things really screwed up. More than you think so in your own house. And you get into the zone of political decisions and representatives of this and who has the power to do this. And things can really fall off the wheels real quickly. And that's why I think, one of the benefits of knowing history is having a compass, having something that says, no, this is what it was before, we don't want to go back there. And a lot of people nowadays don't have a compass. We're yelling at each other. We don't have a compass, and so that lets the people whose only guiding force is power and greed and hatred, that lets them take the day. And that's what's happening these days, folks. That's what I see, and you didn't ask for this, but, that's what I see. And I'm just leaving it. I'm not going to make a play on Make America Great Again, all right? Because America continues, in my opinion, continues to evolve toward greatness. And you don't evolve towards something by going backwards, right? So.
Thank you, Judge Deacon.